Imara as a group has been in Africa for 50 years, so we've got a lot of expertise, doing research on companies and investing in Africa. And what we found since about the second half of last year is a lot of interest in African consumer stocks, not only in South Africa but also to the north of our borders. Certainly, some foreign mandates that we look at, that's where the focus is, the African consumer. What's happening in Europe and the US hasn't affected Africa. We're still looking at growth of 6.5%, largely driven by the consumer in Africa. So in our whole investment philosophy and house view portfolio, even our local shares in our local funds are exposed to Africa. The likes of ShopRite, Mr. Price, all the companies that are moving to Africa, so that's still a very good story. What I like about the retail sector, the local retail sector, I think is valuation. The shares were very expensive towards the end of last year, trading on P's of 30 times, largely driven by foreigners. The shares got re-rated from 16 times to 30 times because they compared our retail stocks with the likes of the Brazilian stocks, and there was value. These stocks are trading on or growing at were growing at 30-40%. They're on ROEs of 35 to 40%, so very well-run businesses. But the quarter four last year, largely driven by the labour action, saw dismal results or very disappointing results towards the end of last year, and those stocks came down 25-30% in the first 2 months of this year. Foreigners were selling, and I thought it was and I still think it's a great opportunity to get in. They're still growing at 20%, not 30 anymore. I think the consumer is in debt. I think the unsecured lending space is slowing down, so I think there's less money going around. But still, growing at 20%, and now you're paying 20 times for those earnings. The P was 30 towards the end of last year. So in my mind, a good entry point. I think long term still a good growth story, and I think a strategic investment nonetheless. Mining side, I still think we're still underweight. I think the labour story this year will continue. There's no real final demand pickup in terms of platinum and base metals yet. You can see every time China disappoints, there's a sell-off in these stocks. So although they're cheap, I think at some point in time, one needs to look at these counters. They're offering value, but I think on a risk-adjusted basis, I'd rather be in Africa, especially the African consumer story.